Good afternoon. Welcome again, everyone here, and those who are joining us from Facebook, Tibet House, Facebook, and YouTube at the conference on neuroscience, Buddhist psychology, and cognitive science. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Stanzan Ladol, volunteer at Tibet House, New Delhi, and I'll be moderating third session, which is on clinical applications of mindfulness and equanimity. I would like to welcome our respected chairperson for the session, Venerable Geshe Damdul, Director, Tibet House, Culture Center of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, New Delhi, and the esteemed speakers, Dr. Ravindra Nagendra ji, Associate Professor, Department of Neurophysiology, Center for Consciousness Studies, NIMHANS, Dr. Nilza Wangmo, Research Scholar, Dr. Chimey Dolkar, Tibetan medical practitioner in Sowarigpa, Nizamuddin Branch Clinic of Tibetan Medical and Astro Science Institute, New Delhi. Dr. Parisha Jijenaji, Assistant Professor of Psychology, MS University of Baroda, Gujarat. I would request all of you to kindly take your respective seats on the dais. Please welcome our chairperson and speakers. Thank you. Allow me to give a brief introduction of our chairperson, Venerable. So now may I request Venerable Geshe Damdul to kindly proceed with the session. Thank you, Gishla.
Thank you, Sensei Hajula. And now I think this is the last session, and this is what we learned thus far, the earlier sessions, and from the keynote speeches. From there, how the concepts are applied clinically, and we see that this I'm very much looking forward to this session for the reason that the speakers here, I know them so well, and they're from different disciplines, and they are each of the speakers, they're really in the peak of their career. And we have Professor Ravindra Nagendra ji, who we all have seen worked so hard for today's, in fact gave 3, including what he is doing today, now gave 3 sessions. Thank you so much. And I know him from many years ago. The first time I met was in a conference, again, on the spirituality and science of consciousness, organized by Ramakrishna Mission in Calcutta. And I thought, wow, a very young neuroscientist and brilliant presentation. I was so fascinated. And from there, two of us, we became very close friends. And we've been including or inviting him for all these programs that Tibet also organizes on neuroscience and psychology. And also we have the Dr. Parisha ji, who you already saw her being the chairperson in the early session. And again, I know her for all these many years. Under her supervision, so many were graduated. And they did the undergrad, they did the master's in psychology with her supervision. And her love for knowledge, and particularly positive psychology, compassion, that's just astounding. And we have here the traditional Tibetan doctor, Dr. Chimey. And again, it's a great honor for us to see the application of what we've learned thus far about the attention, awareness, and the mental health and so forth. So from the point of view of the traditional Tibetan medicine. And Dorji also, we invited to many of these programs, they organized by Tibet House in the earlier years before COVID. And we have Dr. Nizamuddin more as a philosopher. And interestingly, she is more interested in the cross-section between neuroscience and Buddhist psychology and philosophy. So we have the 4 different speakers here. We are very fortunate that we get to learn from the 4 different disciplines and experts. Okay, first, since that Professor Ravindra Nagendra has to leave a little early, so therefore I request Professor Ravindra to give a presentation, and of course he already made the 2 presentations before, so therefore no need of introduction, and I request you to take the podium.
So, playing multiple roles here. Don't know, that is the advantage or a disadvantage when being in an institute where you have both research and the clinical work. So in brief, I would just want to share, certain of my experiences working with few common neuropsychiatric conditions, especially with adolescent depression, and how actually these the ideas that we have been discussing since morning, and especially in the last session where many positive qualities of mind has been elaborated, how is that okay we can implement in the from the patient perspective onwards. So 2 important things that we need to understand. Of course, number 1 is from the Buddhist psychology and the philosophy point of view, we have very wonderful concepts, but how do you want to implement it? So when we want to get into the implementation, there are certain other things also that we need to understand. Number 1 is, the first is to try to understand the trajectory of the disease from the biology perspective or from the medical science perspective. How actually a condition, it can be anxiety, depression, OCD, whatever it is, right? It is coming. And one thing we have to remember that all these neuropsychiatric conditions, they are not unifactorial, they are multifactorial. Biological factors are there, social factors are there, psychological factors are there, and also genetic factors are there. So first we have to understand that. And secondly, that we need to understand whenever a disease is a multifactorial, approach also should be multi. Or say for example, you have any infectious disease, right? One bacteria is causing a particular condition, right? Like Salmonella typhi, falciparum, right? You get a malaria, something like that. So it's very thing, okay, you understand the pathogenesis and you get an antibiotic, right? And okay, so that particular agent is gone, so the symptoms is gone and the disease is cured. But that is not the case in the psychosomatic disorders. It is multifactorial. So our approach to solve certain issues also should be multifactorial, number 1. So does the multifactorial component in the say whatever the neurocognitive model that we have assessed, we have been talked since morning, does that address that? At the personal level, yes. But when it comes to the collective level, it doesn't address. So therefore, whenever we are addressing or when we are incorporating these principles into, say, clinical practice, so there are so many other things also that we need to consider. Say, for example, I may be biased to sleep, but still, it's a fact. So all of us, we know whether we are clinically diagnosed or not. It's very bound that we will undergo face a lot of stress in our life. We get anxiety, we get a little bit depressed, I mean, the mood fluctuations. I'm not telling about the clinical condition, mood fluctuations. One and most important factor that happens to everybody of us is the disturbance in sleep and disturbance in the appetite and disturbance in the behavior. These two will lead into behavior. See, behavior is an overt expression, right? Where that is palpable in the society outward. When I'm angry, I shout, right? The people will see it, right? And when I'm depressed, I'm very, I lock myself, I'm not talking to anybody, so people can really see it, right? So this is one way of expressing. There is other way where it is expressed. The people who are really can control these expressions, right? Even though they're angry, but they don't show their anger. Even though their mood is very less, but they don't show that their mood is less. One important thing as an individual they have to think is that whether their sleep is disturbed, right? So when we are not in contact with any of the society, only thing, okay, that when we are happy with ourselves, the metric is that I'm going to get a very good sleep. So if my sleep is disturbed, right, that indicates that, okay, that either I'm under stress or anxiety or whatever it is, okay, my mind is very fluctuating, right, I'm going to get. So even in the clinical condition also, the first and the foremost target of any clinician, right, they get is to stabilize the sleep of the patient. He comes, you give benzodiazepines, stabilize the sleep. Once the sleep is stabilized, rest of the things will come later. Because even from the, say, neuroscience perspective, sleep is one such a wonderful thing, right? When you get an adequate amount of sleep, that rewires your brain, that reconnects your different areas of the brain, and which will help you to harness your cognition, emotion, right? And also to take the instructions of the counselor. If your mind or the brain is not in a position to take the instructions of the counselor, right, what may be a very good therapist, but your therapy will not be of much use at all. So how do I do it? First is stabilize the sleep, number one. So from with our experience, we have seen that with 1 week of admission, when sleep is stabilized, their mood is also stabilized. So variations in the mood and the sleep disturbance are very much linked with each other. Why I'm telling you this is, subsequently maybe I'll touch upon how does this cultivating all these positive aspects of mind, it also helps in stabilizing sleep, bringing good sleep. In turn, it also brings about their say the biological framework for handling and emotion and cognition in the brain also get very much the corrected. This is number one. Number two, in turn, when we have this lot of these negative emotions, so the first principle is stabilization of the sleep. The second principle is that we have to keep it in mind is, whenever we are giving the positive, say we want to cultivate a positive thing and you are giving a certain module, but it doesn't mean that negative is lost. No, it is there. That is very, very important that we need to understand. The only thing is that, okay, that doesn't surface to a conscious, say, perception or an experience in an individual very frequently. Instead of me getting anxious for every 2 hours or 3 hours, I may get anxious for every 2 days or 3 days. That is still, but it is there. But which will be most nearer to me? Nearer to me will be positive, but not the negative. So how do I approach this positive? So the third important thing is that it is not about bringing down the negative, but it is about increasing the positive. So this is where, right, the Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy comes into picture. We cannot remove the negative because it is ingrained in my brain circuit. It will be there, but the expression of that, right, I can really withhold, or it can be reduced. How do I do it? By increasing that of a positive thing. So the first thing, always one thing that we have to remember is not to try to reduce the negativity, but to increase the positivity. So I'll give a very simple analogy to the patients especially the adolescent depression patient will I get. I want to walk to that door. What should I do? So this is my negative state. That is my target about my positive state. If I want to reach there, what should I do? I should walk towards that positive. But this negative will be here. But I become more nearer to positive, but I become more further to negative. Now, how do I do all these things? Though all the Buddhist psychology emphasizes more on the mind aspect, but from the modern, say, the neurocognitive perspective, we have to understand our physiology. My body is also a part of the cognitive system, as which I was telling in the morning. My body gives the signals, right? Whenever I am in a disturbed state or a happy state, dull state, anxiety state, whatever it is there, my body throws certain signals, and the first and the foremost, as I told you, is that these signals are very gross enough that it captures the attention, right? It captures the attention. So therefore, the first thing is that we have to work at the body level. So give a lot of dynamic activity, but not like a gym-like activity where you listen to the music and go on running, but still at this point of time also, when you're working at the body level, but you give the instruction to the individual that his mind to be anchored on the body movements. Is not thinking of anything else, right? Now, then second thing is of the breath work. We should do a lot of breathing thing. Why it is breathing thing? Two important thing. Number one, among all the physiological activity, breathing is the only thing where it has both voluntary and involuntary activity. Normally, it is involuntary, but if I want to modulate, it becomes voluntary. So voluntarily, if I can modulate my breathing various things, right, it can bring about the corresponding changes in the brain also. Now, how does this work? Say, for example, I was telling about the rumination. In depression, the people ruminate a lot. Now, what do you mean by rumination? Their mind is anchored to the negative quality. They're always thinking about the negative quality. But they're very clear about that negative quality. See, that clarity is there. Clarity of negativity is very clear. But the rigidity is there. So two important things. There is clarity and also there is rigidity. But rigidity and clarity is for the negative thing. Right? But at the same time, they're aware also. You ask any depressed patient, they tell, sir, I'm aware that I'm depressed. I'm aware that negative thing is going in my mind. I know that I need to come out of it, but I'm not able to do it. See, all the other things, their clarity is there, but at the same time, they're very rigid and they're meta-aware also that I'm negative. And they have that intention to come out also, but they're not coming out. So, here comes the very important point which I told you from the neuroscience perspective of different networks which I told in the morning session about focus, attention and all those things. Now here what is happening, that the rumination is so fixed, right? And with their, say, working at the body level and working at the breath level, what I'm doing is I'm activating or I'm increasing the flexibility of their default mode of networking of the brain. Now, when the flexibility of default mode of networking of the brain, what happens? Only one thing that happens is, right, the mind starts wandering. So for me, right, as a therapist, if the fixed mind or negative, if it starts wandering, it's a good sign. He may not concentrate. He may not putting into an attention. No. So my first goal is that his mind is always fixed to the negative, but that negative is very clear to him. He wants to come out. I give him body and the breath work, right? DM and flexibility, it starts coming. Then he says, sir, I'm aware, but still, my mind goes here and there, here and there. Initially, I didn't have that. I always into negative. So first, then you see, then okay. So it means that what his mind has started wandering. Now, what do you mean by mind has started wandering? This mind is going out of his negative and is going for somewhere other thoughts. It can be negative or positive, whatever it is, right? So that his mind wandering has started. And you continue say this, especially, and this happens especially with your breath work. Definitely, because even if you able to concentrate on the breath, because breath is the one thing where it is easy to focus upon, right? And he focus, he tries, he focus, he tries, and he focus. So his DMN network becomes very, very flexible, and mind automatically starts, it's wandering and wandering and wandering. And once the mind starts wandering, then slowly, right, you give an individual for his a focused attention training. Now, in depression, what should be the focus of attention of training? So, in the earlier speaker has mentioned, either it is external focus or to the internal focus. With my experience, I'll tell you the external focus works best, not the internal focus. Anxiety, not the internal focus, external focus. If the person is on the internal focus, or a person is trained for the interoceptive focuses, right, anxiety will increase because he becomes so sensitive for his visceral signals, right, and he perceives more anxiety. So I give what external focus. So I give, okay, you just focus on a point, you just focus on a candle, you just focus on something, and just try to focus. So a rigid mind which was negative was ruminating, right? It became a mind wandering. And mind wandering, this particular mind, which is quite a bit flexible, now I'm training that to focus on the external object. When he focuses on the external object, which is a neutral object, right, then slowly, what will happen? His attention network get into activated, or it gets into picture, right? So all these particular exercises, along with the emotional thing, right, it has to be under supervision. It has to be under a very good trained certified therapist. That is very, very important. And secondly, if possible, right, with medications. Why medications? So because, see, after the morning session I was discussing with few people, what I found is everybody are concerned about either their personal psychological health or maybe of certain issues that they are facing in their day-to-day situation. And what I found was that, okay, people have the conception, okay, with these practices it's a panacea for everything as a standalone. Please, no, not as a standalone. It depends on the condition. If it is mild to moderate anxiety, depression, as a standalone to certain extent, yes. If it is severe, definitely no. So I'll give the pharmacological therapy, go for the benzodiazepines, stabilize the mood, and then give this intervention, right, and increase his cognitive and the emotional regulatory skills, and slowly bring down the medicines, right? So this is how. So generally, we should know how actually at different stages it works and how to bring about. So in all these things, one important thing for the well-being, I want to just focus on this particular slide. So this is what is called as resting state. I mean, that what is there in the content in a person's mind when the mind is not engaged in. That is called as say you may call it as mind wandering also, or resting state cognition, or whatever it is. Now if the resting state, right, of the so if we have a normal type of mind wandering, all this mind wandering, dreaming, creative thinking, all these things are there, but they're not same. They're very, very flexible. But the same mind wandering, right, if it is had a highly constrained, by the negative, right, it becomes ruminating mind. Okay, but if the same, say, mind wandering, right, if it is very much highly very strong and which has a very deliberate constraints, like it becomes a creative thinking, right? And of course there is no constraint, it becomes, right, the dreaming. So these are the different things. Now it all depends on what? It all depends on the constraint that we put on our mind, right? Whether it's a good constraint or a bad constraint. If it is a bad constraint, it becomes into rumination. If it is a good constraint, right, it gets into a creative thinking, or it goes to psychiatric conditions. So where does this Buddhist psychology comes into picture? Buddhist psychology comes into picture what type of constraints that we are putting into this mind wandering. And how do we do it? We have to do it in a very, very, very slow and stepwise manner. We have to work at the physical level, at the breath level, cognitive level, and then at the emotional level. So these are the different aspects probably I think that we want to put. So most important is the constraints that we are going to put for the mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ravindraji. Thank you so much for rendering several the measures by which to deal with our emotional stress and so forth. Thank you so much. So next I'd like to invite Dr. Chimey, a medical doctor, a Tibetan medical practitioner equivalent to MD in Sowarigpa, traditional Tibetan medicine, currently serving at Nizamuddin branch clinic of Tibetan Medical and Astro Science Institute. During the course of 14 years of experience, she has served at various branch clinics of Menzikang Tibetan Medical Center throughout India and Nepal, providing health diagnosis and treatments to a number of patients. She is the member of the Ethic Committee of Experts in the Board of Ethics and Registration under the NCISM, National Commission for Indian System of Medicine. She served as a translator at the Documentation Publication Department with a team recruited for translating Geshe, the main root text for the traditional Tibetan medicine, the fundamental text of Tibetan medicine, into English. Her experience also includes traveling the globe for consultation and delivering lectures at different levels of platform. Okay, so Dr. Chimey, the stage is yours, 20 minutes.
Thank you, Geshe, for the introduction. I would like to begin my presentation with a homage to the medicine Buddha. Tuje dove tunze chumde ne tsenzam tembe nyudu tungi kyab thuksum ne se sange mengila bendurai hyola chatselo. With paying this homage to the medicine Buddha, I take a moment here to calm my nerves, because as much as I was grateful and honored to be invited to speak here, but when I, just like Dr. Ajay Swarup, I was a little overwhelmed when I hear the topic itself. So I reread it three times to understand the topic itself. But then I sat down and tried to think about Tibetan medicine, and I realized that this is what Tibetan medicine is about. Tibetan medicine is about the relationship between body and mind, and how mind affects the body and how body affects the mind, and the role of lung, or one of the principal energies in Tibetan medicine, affects the mind and thus affecting the body. I work with Menzikang. If you're not familiar with Menzikang, it is Tibetan Medical and Astro Institute, which was first established in Tibet by the 13th Dalai Lama in 1913, and then coming to exile in 1961, the 14th Dalai Lama, in the vision that Tibetan medicine and the benefit of Tibetan medicine should not just be confined to Tibetans only, but the all the beings in this world should be benefited. So he re-established this institution in 1961 in Dharamsala. So it just started with just 10 students and 2 doctors. But now, today, we are a full-fledged institute of 54 branches all over India and Nepal. And we have our own research department. We have our own body and mind department. And then we have our own pharmaceutical factory as well. And we have our own college. So so Tibetan medicine, the main purpose of Tibetan medicine, when we in Geshe, the Geshe is the fundamental text of Tibetan medicine. So in that Geshe, it talks about the purpose of Tibetan medicine is health and prosperity, wealth and longevity. So whoever wants to be healthy, wealthy, and prosperity, and to live a long life, you should study a little part of Tibetan medicine. So with this motivation here, I'm here to share or pass on the deep and profound knowledge of Tibetan medicine to the distinguished speakers and all you wonderful participants in this auditorium. So just as I started this session, if you have ever visited one of our Mensikan clinic, we start our day. With this only. So all of our staff gather together, and we pray for 10 to 15 minutes. So this period allows us to set our motivation for the day, and allow us to be more mindful or bring our awareness that we are here to serve the people who are in suffering. Tibetan medicine has, of course, harnessed a lot of interest throughout the world, but being a traditional medicine and also regarded as the complementary medicine or an alternative medicine, we have like many times faced a lot of harsh skepticism as well. So during those times, especially processing or developing or cultivating this mindful meditation, that these comments or these reactions from the patients are not directed to you personally, but it is in their pursuit of seeking happiness and health for themselves and their family. That help us to bring up a more empathetic or a more appropriate response for them. So this is how we start our day in clinic mostly. And so we believe that the physician's capacity for kindness, compassion, and wisdom, his level of ethics and morality, and he's able to extend those qualities to the patient, plays a major role in the recovery of the patient. As a Tibetan physician, we use this. Also, this is we praying here. We use this 3 mode of diagnosis, which are diagnosis based on observation, diagnosis based on palpation or through touch, and then diagnosis based through questioning. So all these techniques need a lot of, we should use our senses, the whole senses in diagnosis, and closely observe the senses of the patients in order to diagnose any imbalance of the internal organs. This component of mindfulness requires awareness and controlled effort to maintain full conscious focus in the present moment without wandering in thought to have an accurate diagnosis. So especially when we are doing, so you must have, if you have been to a Tibetan doctor, we mostly use the diagnosis of pulse. So in my initial years, during pulse diagnosis, I used to close my eyes. I used to close my eyes and try to focus, but trying to block all those sensory distractions. But in time, I have realized that this is not the way. But it's not about blocking those distractions, but rather opening the conscious mind, or maybe alerting our conscious mind to have better understanding of the patient, or better understanding of the elements of those patients, to have a better diagnosis of the patient. So in this way, for me as a physician, I get a wonderful opportunity each time a patient walks in our chamber every day. So I try to work on this or practice this mindful meditation every day. Then let's discuss how you as an individual can practice mindfulness or mindfulness meditation, or to prevent disease and also to treat disease. Mindfulness has been described or explained, has been defined in many ways. So the origin of mindfulness is in the Buddhist scriptures or the Buddhist meditation. It has harnessed a lot of interest in neuroscience over the past decades to study the functioning of mind in relation with the cognitive senses or the cognitive functions, and also in the treatment of these neurological well-being and neurological disorder and psychological disorder. So in Tibetan medicine, this mindfulness meditation has been used over centuries. So we use it for both rehabilitative intervention and also preventive practices for depression, anxiety, hypertension, stress management, and Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, stroke, and other neurological disorders. But I like to think of mindfulness as an art of conscious living. So, and I think this is more relatable as a patient or as an individual. If you think about mindfulness as an art of conscious living, it's about, you don't need to be a Buddhist or a yogic to practice it. It is just an art of it's just trying to focus on yourself and self-analyzing, self-observing, and also while self-analyzing and developing mindful actions accordingly. So when we talk about mindfulness of self-awareness, so actually my topic's about clinical application of mindful meditation. So this is more about analytical. You have to analyze yourself, your constitution as a person. So as a person, we talk about, in Tibetan medicine, we talk about the 7 psychosomatic natures of a person. We introduce yourself to you, who you are as a person, how you are as a person, and why you are as the person you are. And then later we also tell you about how we can get out of you that disorder. Knowing yourself. But first we need to understand how the mind and body is related, using the concept of cause of conception. So during the conception, so what do we say? So let's start with this. The Tibetan medicine believes that all the 5 elements as the building blocks of every organisms, be it living organisms or microorganisms or macroorganisms, living things or non-living things. So 5 elements, these 5 elements, that is the water, space, air, fire, and Yeah. I miss what?
Earth.
Earth, sorry, yes. Yeah, I missed that one. So these are the 5 elements, and these are the building blocks of what do you say, um, all the phenomena, all the observable realities in life. So this, so for this, for the conception, we need the elemental dominant of the healthy sperm of the father and the dominant element of the mother's egg, plus the continuum dominant element of the consciousness and our past karmic imprints and the affective emotions. These all needs to be there to influence or to support these are the driving forces for the cause of conception. And because of this, it defines each of us. And during, especially of course, so when a baby is in a womb, we emphasize on what a mother should eat or how the diet or the lifestyle of a mother should, because it has a great impact on how your baby is going to be, what type of individual if your baby is going to be. So like I said, the 5 elements and the 3 principal energies. So the 5 elements also makes these 3 energies. So if you have heard about Vata, Pitta and Kapha in Ayurveda, so it's very similar in Tibetan medicine as well. It's Lung, Tipa and Pekin. These are the 3 principal energies in your body. So these energies are not visible, but they are energies in your body which helps form our body, do all the functions in our body and sustain our body. So the lung, which is roughly translated as the wind energy, is derived from the air and space element. The chipa, which is the heat energy, is derived from the fire element, and pekin, which is the cold energy, is derived from the water and earth element. So like I discussed before, so our body is made of 4 elements. So because of that, the disorders is also made of 4 elements. So where do we go to find the ailments for this disease? Not outside, yeah. So it also depends on the 4 or 5 elements. So Tibetan medicine use this concept to alter the elements, to understand your elements first, the dominance of elements first, and then how we can interact with these elements, how we can, how can we talk or interact, then we can change the elements to have a healthy living or to have a healthy body, mind and life, healthy body and mind. So we talk about desire, hatred, and close-mindedness in the former sessions. But here we move a little further. So because of the self-grasping, because of ignorance, we have the self-grasping ignorance or the self-attachment ignorance. Because of that self-grasping ignorance, it develops into desire, hatred and close-mindedness, which again produces lung, tipa, pekin. That we can see in our body, that results in a psychosomatic disorders or a well-being of a person. So lung is, what is lung? Lung is the movement. It is mainly responsible for your respiratory functions of the body. So Tipa is the heat, and it is mainly responsible for your endocrine system in your body. And Pekin is mainly linked with your cold energy and is responsible for your lymphatic system in your body. So I won't go more detail in this because we'll miss the main topic here. So like I said, you have to know who you are. If you don't know who you are and how you are, how we are going to, this so self-analyzing of a person is very important. So I have made a rough chart here to describe how you are as a person. There are 7 psychosomatic natures of nature of a person according to Tibetan medicine, that is based on Lung, Tipa, and Pekin, and they can be also a dual nature of Lung Tipa, Lung Pekin, and then Tipa Pekin and Lung, and then lastly the combination of all these three Nyepas. So if you want to analyze yourself, you can use this chart and see what type of person you are. And we can invite more questions about the diet and lifestyle according to these elements or these nyepas during the question and answer sessions. Okay, because we are talking about nerves and brains here. So not just the physiological, not just the psychological and emotional, also the shape of the brain. Okay, I would skip this. So how can we use awareness as medicine? So you are aware of your body constitution. Now this awareness we turn into, we have to know the cause and the causative factors of your disease. Then be mindful. Tibetan medicine teaches you about the main two important causes of disorders. Unwholesome diet, according to your diet and lifestyle, according to your nature, and then unwholesome lifestyle, according to your nature. So normally people say exercise. Exercise is very good for you. You know, you have to do exercise. But if exercise is recommended for everyone, no. And also the levels of the exercise also depends on the nature of the person. So for a person like me, a Pekin person, I need to exercise. I need to do as much as I can because I need to improve my metabolism. But for a cheaper person, for a person who is having a lot of heat in the liver, that will aggravate the disorder and cause more problem than help. So you have to be mindful of what you are doing, of being who you are and how you behave to avoid those problems as first. And then if there is a disorder, how you can treat those problems, being mindful of your elements. Brain and nervous system and traditional Tibetan medicine. So when in Geshe, during the embryological formation, so one channel goes up and becomes the brain, and because the brain is of fluidity, the Pekin or the delusive mind lies there. That's why when we have headache or fogginess or confusion, it lies here. We touch here, right? It's because of that. Because the Pekin, which lies in the brain. I'm going through this very quickly. Okay, so it's about the nervous system. So, okay. So it's enough. The numerication or the extensiveness of how the tsa or the channels are described in Geshe is very extensive. But we would briefly like to talk about Sokta Nakpo, which is called the blood life channel, where the blood vessels flow and which is more of a blood dominant and it gives more heat energy. And then Sokta Karpo, which is more related with nerves, they are lung dominant. And these kind of channels which are not physical, which does not have a direct relate to the physical, but mostly used in tantric practices. These three channels are called the Uma, Kyangma, and Roma. The Uma is the central channel where which descends from the brain to the genitals and where the wind flows. So where the life-sustaining wind flows. And that is where also our life or dissipates, our soul or consciousness dissipates. And then right to the central channel, there is Roma, which ascends towards the center of the body. And then it is associated with heat and blood, and it produces more aggression. And then right to the central, it's Kyangma, or the more of the it is more related with brain and nervous system, and it is more related with the lunar energy or the cold energy. Okay, I'll grudge. So I'll briefly talk about this in my last 2 minutes. So cultivation of mindful meditation can have an influence on physical, mental, and emotional health. People with a sense of awareness of the reality, and a lot of panelists spoke about what the reality is. So I don't need to speak on it. So reported less use of medical services, less minor illness, and a more complete recovery from minor illness than the national averages. So those patients with greatest mindfulness, even though the illness were terminal, some patients who have cancer and all, but because of their mindfulness or the mindset, they show more resilient emotional health compared to others. So it also impacts hugely on the unique component in patients' ability to cope with serious and chronic illness. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shimila. Thank you so much for giving such a comprehensive presentation. Thank you. So next we have Dr. Nizamuddin. Let me introduce her very quickly. Dr. Nilza got her Bachelor of Arts degree from Lady Shri Ram College, Delhi University, and her Master's and MPhil degree in Buddhist Studies from Delhi University. She was awarded a PhD degree from JNU in 2018 and was UGC JRF Fellow. She attended the Mindful Life Summer Research Institute at Garrison, New York in 2016. She has taught at Central Institute of Buddhist Studies, Leh, Ladakh in 2020. She worked for the global launch of Social, Emotional, Ethical Learning in New Delhi under the auspices of His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2019. She worked as a research associate for the International Buddhist Confederation, referred to as the IBC, until recently. She has participated in various conferences and online talks for Global Peace Foundation on Facets of Faith 2020 and Earth Day Network India on Interfaith Dialogue on Investing in Our Planet. Her aim and vision is to study and share the rich philosophy of 17 Nalanda Masters, complementing it with modern science as envisioned and advised by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So, Dr. Nizamuddin, the stage is yours, 20 minutes.
Thank you, Vishnu. Thank you, Vishnu, and thank you, Tibet House, for this opportunity. So most of the speakers have already spoken extensively on the mind, meditation, neuroscience. So I would like to directly start with a basic presentation, differentiating the brain from the mind. So here, as you can all see, how to demarcate the mind from the brain. You can see the brain is a objective phenomena, whereas the mind is subjective. Brain is a substantial and tangible phenomena, while the mind is non-substantial and intangible. And the brain is composed of physical parts, while the mind is composed of temporal parts. And the brain can be understood through scientific or empirical approach, while to understand the mind, one has to apply the naturalistic approach. And the brain can be studied through a third-hand experience, and the mind is understood or experienced, which is a first-hand experience. And also the brain is like the container, and the mind is like the content in the container. So going further, so as you know, my topic, I'll be speaking, I've picked up a few experiments which have been done by the neuroscientists, which is the culmination of the dialogue between the neuroscientist and the medical doctors with the Buddhist meditators or philosophers, presided over by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And these dialogues have been taking place for the past more than 30 years or so. So most of these, probably 6-7 of them, I've picked up from the Mind and Life books. And I haven't changed much of the language here because I'm not an expert on neuroscience, so I was afraid I might change the meaning of it. So I'll just go through it. The frontal lobe of the brain in relation to the rest of the brain size in humans, there is a higher reaction than in other species. So this tells us that there's something important about the frontal lobe for qualities that are distinctly human. So the frontal lobe, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, in these three places in the brain, change in response to experience is seen. So they are the parts of the brain dramatically affected by the emotional environment in which we are raised and by repeated experience. So the frontal lobe, the amygdala, and the hippocampus are all extensively connected with the body, in particular with the immune system and the endocrine system, which regulates the heart rate, the blood pressure, and so on. So this begins to provide some clue as to how the mind can influence the body so that we can understand the impact of emotions, not just on our mental health, but also on our physical health. So we can see there's a very close connection between our emotions and how the emotions affect the frontal lobe, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, which in turn affects our immune system. So going next is Professor Richard Davidson in his laboratory, EMKEC laboratory. He invited Buddhist monk to study intensively the state of the heart-brain measures. So many crucial tests like the fMRI, EEG were run on the monk's brain while he sat in different forms of meditation, practicing practices such as meditation on compassion, fearlessness, devotion, etc. So what was seen is in the EEG analysis, more striking was a dynamic increase in the key electrical activity known as gamma in the left middle frontal gyrus. So I think the neuroscientists, the neuroscience people would know. I don't know the exact locations, but these are the findings. A zone of the brain previous research had pinpointed as a locus for positive emotions. So they have connected the left middle frontal gyrus with positive emotions. So there's also a striking association between the clarity and luminosity practice that practitioners report during the compassion meditation and the magnitude of gamma signals. So going further, another experiment where compassion meditation changes the brain response to the presentation of distressing sounds. When we present a recording of a woman screaming for just a couple of seconds, the practitioners show a remarkable increase in activation in the insula. So I think this was what Professor Nagendra ji already spoke about. The insula is a part of the brain critical for communicating with the body and provides information on the state of the body to the rest of the brain. So different visceral organs project information to the insula. So the insula has been implicated in empathy, while the medial prefrontal cortex has been implicated in self-relevant processing. So this area of the brain gets activated. So the medial prefrontal cortex gets activated when people think about themselves. So when somebody is thinking about oneself, which is self-cherishing, what Dr. Pujala was talking about, and when you talk about other cherishing mind, where the empathy comes in. So this area of the brain associated with the self is deactivated when people are generating compassion, which is very much a selfless state. So we see a very close connection between the meditation and compassion and the various parts of the brain. So this is another experiment, Dr. Paul Ekman, he's a pioneer in the study of emotions. And he led at his laboratory, Human Interaction Laboratory at the University of California, San Francisco. The test consists of a videotape in which a series of faces show a variety of expressions very briefly. So the challenge is to identify whether you have seen just the facial signs, for instance, of contempt or anger or fear. So different expressions or different emotions, facial expressions were shown to the subject. Each expression stays on the screen for just 1/5 of a second. The ability to recognize the fleeting expressions signals an unusual capacity for accurate empathy. So this is as per the neuroscience findings. So the result here was they studied 2 meditation adepts, and the study showed 2 standard deviation above the norm in recognizing these super quick facial signals of emotion. They both scored far higher than any of the 5,000 other people tested, better than policemen, lawyers, psychiatrists, custom officials, judges, and even secret service agents. So these are very interesting findings. And there's another experiment, which is the startle reflex. One of the most primitive responses in the human repertoire, the startle reflex, involves a cascade of quick muscle spasms in response to a loud, surprising sound or sudden jarring sight. So far as brain science understands, the mechanism that controls the startle reflex cannot be modified by any intentional act. So this is the standpoint of the neuroscientists, the neuroscience. They wired the meditator to capture his heart rate and sweat response and videotaped his facial expressions, all to record his physiological reactions to a startling sound. When meditator tried to suppress the startle, it almost disappears. So Dr. Paul Ekman said, "We don't have any idea of the anatomy that would allow him to suppress the startle reflex." So this is another very interesting. So they were all done on Buddhist meditation practitioners. So, okay, I'll just go forward. And there's another very interesting experiment done by Dr. Herbert Benson. He's a MD, Associate Professor of Medicine, Harvard Medical School. And he has done an experiment on Tummo practitioners. So Tummo is a Tibetan term. So he says that he met His Holiness in 1979 at Harvard and took his permission and sought his permission to do some studies on Tummo practitioners. So what exactly is Tummo practice is what he says he learned from late Alexandra David Neal in her writings when she visited Tibet and saw monks in midwinter performing Tummo yoga, which is a sophisticated Buddhist meditation technique which is performed to generate an internal body heat that helps get rid of mental defilements. So I think these are not just simple meditation techniques. These are very highly sophisticated ones where the meditation on emptiness, visualization, and controlling the channels, what Dr. Chimey just spoke about. So these things are involved. And around them, so what they also observed was they observed drying eyes, wet sheets on their bodies in midwinter by generating this heat. So these meditators, they were basically naked, just covered with a cotton cloth, dipped in water, and then within few minutes, the cloth dries up because of the internal heat generated. So here, what was interesting when I was gathering these information, what I found interesting was for ordinary people like us who are not Tummo practitioners. So we have this ability to either generate heat or conserve heat in our bodies. So one way is through muscle activity, and one way is through chemical stimulation. So normally in the winters when we feel cold, the first thing that starts to feel really cold is our fingers and our toes. So it says that because the body heat is directed towards the vital organs, so these fingers, which are they start to first cool down. So whereas Tummo practitioners, they can totally they can how do you say? I forgot the term. They can manipulate the heat within their bodies through that practice. So I'll just go through this table. So these are different subtleties of mind in Buddhism at different stages of wakefulness, sleep, or death. So this is again taken from the book Sleeping, Dreaming, and Dying. And I think, yeah, during my PhD, Geshe has helped me with, just with the mind in Buddhism part. So in the wakefulness stage, you see beta waves. The frequency you can see 15 to 60 hertz, amplitude 30, and description is brain is in a waking state, alert, actively processing information, like right now at the moment, our minds. And in Buddhism, it's called the gross or the sensory mind, which is heavily dependent on the physical body. And then goes a little subtler than the gross mind, which is the relaxing and meditating stage, where you see alpha waves and frequency 8 to 12 hertz and 30 to 50 amplitude, and found in awakened people. People are still awake, but they're relaxing or they're meditating. So this mind is subtler within the waking state. So associated with memory and emotions. So this is the stage where memory and emotions are involved, where you see theta waves, 3 to 8 hertz, 50 to 100 amplitude, and brain is associated with memory, emotions, and activity in the limbic system in the form of imprints. So in Buddhism, what we talk about the imprints, mental imprints from our past lives. And the deep sleep or coma state, we see delta waves, 3 to 4 hertz and 100 to 200 amplitude, and the brain which is in deep sleep or in coma. And here the mind becomes even more subtler. So in Buddhism, the mind can be understood at various different levels of subtleties. So here the very subtle mind there are 4 stages: white appearance, red increase, black near attainment, and clear light mind. So this clear light mind is much grosser than the clear light mind at the time of death. So ultimately it's the clinical death, where there's no brain wave, no frequency, no amplitude. So the person is clinically declared dead, and there the mind becomes the subtlest, the clear light mind. So so I think Dr. Pujala had already explained the first verse from Dhammapada. Mind is the chief and precedes all phenomena. If with an impure mind one acts or speaks, miseries follow like a cart following the ox. Mind is the chief and precedes them all. If with a pure mind one acts or speaks, happiness follows like the shadow that never leaves. So this is said by the Buddha. And I picked up what Acharya Dharmakirti said in Pramanavartika chapter 2. The true nature of the mind is clear light, whereas the afflictions or mental stains are adventitious. Where he's trying to say that the mind is like, the minds of the ordinary people is like a murky water, and the dirt in the water is separable from the clean water. So the mental afflictions that we have, the ignorance that we have, which binds us in samsara, in the state of suffering, they can be removed. They are not of the same nature with the nature of the mind. And the others I picked up from Bodhicharya Avatara by Acharya Shantideva, one of my favorite verses. So here we could, I picked it up because it makes a lot of sense in the context of this conference, where we're trying to talk about the Western science and the inner science of the mind. So here Acharya Shantideva says, where would I find enough leather to cover the entire surface of the earth? But with leather soles beneath my feet, it is as if the whole world has been covered. So this is such a beautiful line. And then ultimately, I would like to just go through the word of salutation to the compassionate Buddha from Acharya Dignak's Pramana Samuchaya, which is Compendium of Treatises on Valid Cognition, 6th century. So Acharya Dignak wrote these words of salutation to the Buddha: the one who has transformed into the reliable guide, motivated by altruism to benefit sentient beings, the teacher, Sagata, and protector, to you I make prostrations. So after about a century later, Acharya Dharmakirti came and he wrote a commentary on these 4 lines, and it was called the Pramanavartika, chapter 2, which comprises of 283 stanzas. And so basically here the one who's transformed into the reliable guide connotes that Prince Siddhartha was just an ordinary being. He transformed into the reliable guide not out of magic or some kind of external blessing. He did it through a path. He took a path towards enlightenment, and he gained complete knowledge of the self and the world, and manifested the true nature of the mind, and then became a reliable guide. So in this text, Pramanavartika chapter 2, the whole discussion is whether the mind and the body are one or different. So I'll just... Okay, so it is said that to become a Buddha, one has to generate the great compassion. And great compassion is not very easy to generate in one lifetime. So Acharya Dharmakirti talked about next life. So here the whole debate came up between Acharya Dharmakirti and the Charvaka school, Indian philosophical school, which is a materialist school. And their philosophical system standpoint is very much similar to the current neuroscience or the Western science. So what they say is the mind and the body they are one. So when the body dies, the mind dies. There's no next life. So, and they gave a couple of examples which are very interesting. So they gave the analogy of the wall and the painting on the wall. So they said the mind and the brain are like so the wall is the brain and the painting on the wall is the mind. It's just a product of the brain. Mind is just a product of the brain. And 2 more examples which are quite interesting: the flame and the light. And I forgot the third, sorry. Anyway, so this debate happened between the liquor and the intoxication caused by the liquor. So are they one or are they different? So this is the debate happening between the Charvakas and the Buddhist school, Acharya Dharmakirti. So the current neuroscience standpoint is, the next slide. So in Dr. Eric Kandel's book, In Search of Memory, Dr. Eric Kandel is a Nobel laureate in physiology. So there are 2 basic standpoints or hypotheses of neuroscience. So one position is more like a classical position where they say the mind does not exist, it's only the brain. And now with time and with a lot of discussions and conferences like this, the Mind and Life dialogues, many of the neuroscientists have started to accept that there is a mind, but to say that it's completely different from the brain, it's a huge position to take. So what they say is the mind is there, but it's the byproduct of the brain. It's not the brain itself, but it's just the result of the brain. So here, when we say something is a byproduct, we are saying that something is derived. So there's a causation happening. So in this case, the brain and the mind, there are only 2 possibilities. They can either be existing sequentially or they can be existing simultaneously. So these are the only 2 possibilities. So logically speaking, so if we say the mind and the brain are sequential, like the fire and the smoke, this is also accepted by Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy. But what Buddhism talks about is the mind and the brain are 2 distinct entities, but they're interrelated, they work intricately together. while if we say that the brain and the mind are simultaneously existing, like the table and the top plank of the table, then there are logical fallacies, because two distinct entities, they cannot have a cause-effect relationship. So yeah, I'll just sum up. So also in Pramanavartika, like what Professor Nagendra was talking about, the breath. So even the breath is extensively discussed here. And so the breath is accompanied by the mental factor of intention. So the constant intention to either driven by afflictions or the ignorance or driven by bodhicitta. So either way, the mind, so the tulkus or the reincarnated lamas, they have this intention to continue to benefit sentient beings like the 14th Dalai Lama. So this intention to take birth in this human realm is directed by this intention, mental factor of intention, and that directs our breath. And in many cases, I think many of us have seen in our society that people who are healthy and yet mentally they give up to live, the willingness to live is gone, they eventually end up dying despite a very good health. So so the mind and the brain, they have different continuums, but they are causally related. So yeah, long discussion. So I'll end my thing with a small conclusion, which His Holiness says is that the primary aim of Buddhist meditation techniques is the attainment of enlightenment, but it is possible to experience even mundane benefits such as good health. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nizamuddin. You have brought very complicated matters, the brain-mind relationship, how these two are one, they are different entities. Yes, extremely important topic. Thank you so much. So next we have Dr. Parisha Jijinaji, who has completed her master's in psychology from University of Pune and MPhil in clinical psychology from University of Delhi and PhD from the MS University of Baroda. She is working as assistant professor of psychology in the MS University of Baroda since the last 10 years. And is also currently the assistant director of the postgraduate diploma in clinical and applied hypnosis. Her interests lie in exploring indigenous constructs which can contribute to the Indian ethos of well-being and be useful in psychotherapeutic applications in the Indian context. 20 minutes, Dr. Parisha.
Thank you, Keshila. So, just to introduce my topic, equanimity is a very, very ancient concept, and it is traced back to many ancient philosophies, such as it's one of the core philosophies in the Bhagavad Gita, of course in Buddhism, and also in Western philosophies such as Stoicism. So the aim of the research that we did was to understand equanimity as a core psychological construct and also to explore its relation with various psychosocial health parameters such as addiction, loneliness, etc. Now, why did we feel the need for this study? So, our native scriptures and texts are in-depth knowledge systems about the human mind, and psychologists time and again have stressed the limitations of simply copy-pasting theories from the West. So I have been teaching psychology since a decade, and I find that 95% of our syllabus comes from the West. Hardly we study Indian psychology. Okay? So there's a very strong need to indigenize the discipline. Also, the world that we are living in is a VUCA world, we call it, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. So the development of equanimity can help us more adaptively cope in this VUCA world. And as we know, COVID is again coming back. So if we develop equanimity, again, it will really help us cope. So looking at the theoretical frameworks of equanimity in the literature, it has been defined as an even-minded state or a dispositional tendency towards all experiences. So in simple words, this means that in states of equanimity, there is a decoupling. what is decoupled? We are not constantly craving pleasant experiences, nor are we constantly running away or avoiding unpleasant experiences. Okay. Now, a slight distinction between mindfulness and equanimity, because in the psychological literature, sometimes these two terms have been often conflated. Right? So if we look at the traditional definitions of mindfulness, for example, from Kabat-Zinn, where he has said, mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment in a non-judgmental way. So technically speaking, mindfulness is the part where we pay attention, and when we pay attention in an open, accepting, non-judgmental way, that's where equanimity comes in. Okay, so the research design that we used was exploratory sequential. When the topic that you're researching is not very well defined, usually we first do qualitative methods and then go on to quantitative. So that's what we did. This research was carried across 4 years. In the first year, we analyzed equanimity from its roots. So when we talk of roots, the roots are definitely in Bhagavad Gita and in Buddhism. So both these philosophies were extensively studied. Following which, now Bhagavad Gita, Buddhism, these are very, very old philosophies. So we wanted to understand, is equanimity really relevant in 2020? So many centuries later, is it really relevant? So for that, we interviewed 30 experts. Geshe, thank you. He was one of the experts who we interviewed. And after that, based on the qualitative findings, we developed a scale or a measure of equanimity which can be used in research. So phase 1, analysis of equanimity in Bhagavad Gita and Buddhism. So Bhagavad Gita has 700 verses across 18 chapters. I analyzed all the verses, and through a method given by Professor Dharam Bhavuk, we developed models based on equanimity. So in the Bhagavad Gita, there is a threefold understanding of equanimity. So Krishna tells Arjun that you need to be even-minded towards objects, you need to be even-minded towards experiences such as pleasure, pain, gain, loss, and most importantly, you need to be even-minded towards all individuals. So Krishna tells Arjun that there is one of the verses, it's a very beautiful verse in the Bhagavad Gita, where he tells Arjun that, Arjun, for you, a human being, elephant and a dog should be all the same. So then Arjun says, how can they be the same? An elephant is very different from a human being, a dog is very different. So then Krishna explains to him that underlying all the elephant, the human being and the dog, the underlying consciousness is the same. So hence you cannot be, you have to be same to a friend or a stranger, you have to be equal to a stranger and a comrade. Okay. Then further, just to illustrate, around 6 to 7 models, I'm just going to talk about one model. So in chapter 2 verse 14, there is a verse which talks about that when our senses come in contact with objects or experiences, it generates either sensation of pleasure or pain. Right? But if we understand impermanence, if we have an understanding of transience, then we develop titiksha. Now this model of the Bhagavad Gita was further synthesized with psychological concepts. So let's take a simple example. Let's say your boss has really yelled at you today morning, right? Now how are you going to feel? You're going to feel very bad, you're going to feel very angry, right? So you have these cognitive affective feelings. But suppose this is further mediated by your understanding of the transience of this. So for example, if today my boss has yelled at me, last month he may have praised me also. Last year he may have given me a promotion also. So if your experience is mediated by the cognitive understanding of transience, then what happens is, as a professor from NIMHANS was saying, rumination becomes less. Your self-referential processing becomes less, right? And this, in fact, may enhance your cognitive flexibility. So here you may think that, okay, my boss yelled at me. What can I learn from this? What is the lesson for me in this? Okay. So then moving on to analysis of upekha in the Buddhist tradition. So since I'm into counseling and therapy, I would like to talk about the analytical contemplations for the cultivation of upekha. Buddhism is very, very rich in concepts which can be used in counseling for Tenzin and for the doctors over here. So a lot of analytical contemplations, we looked into the text. So the first one, again, very similar to Bhagavad Gita, where we understand the transience of relationships. So today, if you are my friend, tomorrow you could become my enemy. Vice versa, today if you are my enemy, tomorrow you can become my friend. So why should I distinguish between friend versus enemy? Right? Then the next cultivation is the harmful consequences of harboring hatred, and also the understanding that all beings are basic in very three ways. So all of us want to avoid suffering, and all of us have capacity for inner goodness. And the last one, which is my most favorite, is the interdependence with all beings. So, for example, there's a very simple example to think about interdependence. So, the tea that we just had. So, if we reflect, how many people might be involved in bringing that one cup of tea to you, right from the farmer who grew the leaf to the woman who plucked the leaves to the person who took it to the factory, so etc etc. So probably more than 1,000 people are involved in just bringing that one cup of tea to you, right? So these are very interesting contemplations what therapists and doctors should look into for their patients. Then moving on to the interview with experts. So there were 30 experts, and they included meditation teachers, monks, holistic mental health practitioners, and these interviews, we had around 1,000 minutes of audio recording. When we transcribed them, it was more than 100 pages of raw data, and we analyzed it using thematic analysis. So what we found was, through the interview data, that equanimity is basically a widening perspective on experience. So in this states of equanimity, there is hedonic neutrality. Hedonic neutrality meaning you are not overly drawn towards one experience, nor are you running away from any kind of pain. You are in the center, you are stable. Similarly, in states of equanimity, there is increased distress tolerance. Now, for us as psychologists, this is very important. When your tolerance for distress is higher, automatically your reactivity is less. So instead of reacting, you are responding more adaptively, right? Similarly, the interview data showed that in states of equanimity, there is also a broadening of perspective towards individuals. So over here in these states, there is reduced bias, and there is reduced preconceived notions. Also, there is increased empathy and compassion. So one of the monks who I interviewed, he told me that the true test of equanimity is if you are in a garden and a child falls down in front of you. If you are really an equanimous person, you will have the same response whether it is or whether it is not your child. You will run and help the child. And most importantly, equanimity is rooted in wisdom and insight. So over here, the person has a lot of insight into the transitory nature of experiences and the conditioned nature of experiences. Okay. Now, most importantly, all the experts shared that equanimity can also be mistaken for apathy. कि तो मैं कुछ नहीं करूँगा, मैं I'll be very indifferent, I'll be very passive. But all the experts stressed that equanimity can be very seemingly deceptive. So we have to guard against what is not equanimity. So equanimity is definitely not apathy. मतलब मैं indifferent रहूँगा. It's definitely not that. It's definitely not passivity. And based on the interview data, this is the model that we have come up with: the cognitive aspects of equanimity, the affective aspects, and the cognitive aspects. So in the cognitive aspect, we found that awareness, insight, acceptance. In the affective realm, we found hedonic neutrality, enhanced distress tolerance, and in the behavioral aspect, we found an equanimous person will react less, will definitely have a lot of compassion, and will have an enhanced capacity to endure stress. Okay. Then based on this data, we developed a scale to measure equanimity. And the data, we developed some items, 23 items, and the data was collected from 800 participants. And using factor analysis, 6 factors were found in the scale. Again, very similar to the interview data. So the first is reduced hedonic craving. tolerance for distress, reduce reactivity, interconnectedness. Interconnectedness is the understanding that all sentient beings, irrespective of their form, shape, they are essentially equal. Affective equipoise. Affective equipoise meaning someone who is little bit balanced in the duality, so whether it is success, whether it is failure. And impartial view. Impartial view means you have reduced discrimination, reduced prejudices. Next, we saw, using this measure, we saw what is its relation of equanimity with key health variables such as neuroticism, neuroticism meaning anxiety, loneliness, addiction, and well-being. So, as predicted, the results found that the more equanimous you are, the more less you will be reactive. Okay. Then again, we found that equanimity is negatively correlated with neuroticism. This has very high implications for those who are into counseling and therapy, which means that the more equanimous you are, the less anxiety you experience. Okay. Similarly, with equanimity, you will feel less lonely. Why will you feel less lonely? Because for you, there is no distinction that you are my friend, you are not my friend, right? Again, with equanimity, social media addiction was found to be less. Reason being, in states of equanimity, we are not constantly craving. Craving is less for pleasant experiences. And equanimity was positively correlated with all the types of well-being, with social well-being, with emotional well-being, and psychological well-being. Okay. And the results showed that equanimity predicted neuroticism the most. So this means that if equanimity is brought into therapeutic applications, it will have a very significant effect on people who are experiencing anxiety. Okay. Now, interestingly, what we found was that as the person's age increased in their younger years, equanimity increased, but it sort of stabilizes once you are 40. Okay. And with education, again, equanimity increases. And another important finding was that the practice of meditation was the highest correlated with equanimity. Yoga, prayers, religious activities such as seva, satsang, they did not have such a high correlation with equanimity. Now, what are the implications of this study for us? So the first is that it helps to deconflate mindfulness and equanimity because these are often interchangeably used in the scientific literature. Second is it establishes links with psychosocial health, and it helps us to have a more balanced approach towards well-being. Okay, because nowadays with the advent of positive psychology, a lot of it is always be happy, etc., etc., but this gives us a more balanced approach. Okay. And it is very useful for example, say someone like Tenzin, she can bring in these concepts when she is doing counseling, right? It will also help us to deal with addictive behaviors. People who are constantly doing counseling, or doctors, equanimity can also help them to deal with their compassion fatigue and burnout. So to conclude, this research is contribution to the Indian ethos of well-being, and with this, I hope my deepest gratitude to Geshe over here, because he has really guided me in this study. So thank you, Geshe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Borishaji. All your efforts so well delivered, shared with us, your years of experience in teaching and your years of research. Thank you so much. So due to constraint of time, we could not take up questions. So I wholeheartedly, along with all the participants, I wholeheartedly thank all the 4 participants. Thank you so much. Give them a big round of applause. Thank you, all the participants. And from this, what I may say is that the most important thing is, yes, learning all these things, say cognitively how mind works, and from neuroscience point of view, what is really happening in your brain, how the brain instructs the muscles, your hormones, and so forth, and philosophically, how your correlationship with the object and subject, how you know knowing the object so well, and then the medically speaking, say how your cognitive aspects can influence your physiology, and physiology, which is consists of the three essential, say, the elements as explained by Dr. Chimey, and then about the upeksha, or equanimity, tangyum, which is a very different connotation from how we otherwise read it in the vernacular language. Instead of being indifferent to somebody else, but to embrace everybody with love and affection, not leaving aside anyone. So knowing these things, application. So these should help us enrich our knowledge and become more confident. Number one, to be happy yourself. This is so important, to be happy yourself, to know how to be happy. Once you know how to be happy, then you can export your happiness to others by rendering this knowledge, not by saying that be happy. Instead of that, how to be happy. Given that you have learned all these things, apply to yourself, and you see that there's a tremendous benefit, and then you share this knowledge with others, and actually let the knowledge flow with love and affection, then effects will be felt. Otherwise, if you say, don't shout, you are shouting, and you are saying, not shout, this will not help. So, say, share this knowledge with love and affection. What you have experienced, people who feel your love and affection, then the transformation takes place. So, charity begins at home. The first thing that we do is stop shouting at your mother. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable Geshe Damdul, for sharing the session, and all the distinguished speakers for your beautiful presentations. Now, I may request Venerable Geshe to kindly present souvenirs to the speakers. Okay, Dr. Ravindra Nagendra ji. Okay, Dr. Nilza Wangmula. Dr. Chimey Dolkar. Dr. Parisha Jujanaji. Thank you, Venerable Geshe. Now I would like to request Mr. Tenzin Kunkyabla, Secretary to Tibet House, to kindly present the thank you note. Mr. Tenzin Kunkyabla.
Good evening, everyone. So to conclude this event, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers and chairpersons for accepting our invitation and for sharing your profound knowledge with us. I wish to thank all the audience, our wonderful audience and students for your participation. And I extend my heartfelt gratitude to our director, Geshe Damdul, and Professor Kavirila, Professor Pujala, for always being there for us. Last but not the least, I would like to thank my colleagues for all the efforts and enthusiasm towards putting all this together. Thank you. And we hope to see you all again soon in our various seminars and events. As you can find in your program kit, we are organizing the conference on universal ethics on 7th of January and 2023. And we have already started the registration for the 4th batch of Nalanda Diploma course. And the registration will remain open till 31st of March 2023. With this, we have reached the end of this conference, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in advance. Thank you. Have a great night. And I wish to request all the speakers to kindly join us for a quick group picture on the dais. Thank you.